Hello and welcome to this episode of the Political Debrief Podcast. I'm your host, Josh Oliverio. Usually, Canadians think about a lot of issues that are affecting their daily lives, like, right now, inflation, the cost of living, and so many other topics like housing, national defense, and many more. Often, though, Canadians don't think about our democracy in general. And my next guest, Dave Meslin, wants to change that. He has some ideas that are coming from his book, Tear Down, Rebuilding Democracy from the Ground Up, on how to do just that. Here's our conversation. And joining me now is the author of Tear Down, Rebuilding Democracy from the Ground Up, Dave Meslin. Dave, thank you so much for joining me today.
Josh, it's a pleasure. Thanks for the invitation.
First of all, what got you interested in reforming, changing, improving our democracy? Many people have a lot of different issues that are true to their heart and that they care about, but we don't often hear about people loving to fix our democracy. So I think that's a really interesting idea or thing you chose to focus on. What got you into reforming our democracy?
It comes really naturally to me. And, what's interesting is that people love fixing stuff in general. You've got self-help books. We love seeing, like, on television, like, makeovers of a home or a restaurant. We love the idea of taking something and radically improving it, or even like breaking it down to its bare bones and like reimagining how it could work better. So why wouldn't we do that for democracy? Why do we upgrade the operating systems on our phone every like month when we haven't upgraded the operating system of our democracy in generations? So I got involved with activism probably around your age. I was really concerned about, we didn't call it climate change back then. We called it, actually, even before global warming, it was acid rain. That was the big scare of the 90s, acid rain. And so I got involved with issue-based activism, and it didn't take long for me to realize that the political system itself seemed kind of broken. And the lack of choice at election time, the same parties just kind of trading power back and forth seemed kind of boring and dull to me. But most importantly, seeing election results where the majority of voters would reject a party and that party would win. That just seemed wrong to me. The first example for me was when Mike Harris formed a majority government in Ontario in, I don't know when it was, 95 maybe. And most Ontarians didn't vote for his platform. So that just seemed mathematically wrong. And it sent me down this journey of exploring how our democracy works. And the further I dug, the more problems I found.
So, there's lots of different ways to express your ideas on how to fix something, as you just mentioned. Why a book?
The book was not my first method. So I wrote that book when I was 45, and I started doing activism around democratic reform in my 20s. So a book was like yeah, it's one tool, right? And I guess I thought, hey, why not try it? I haven't written a book yet, so I've now put out a book, my first and last, hopefully. Um, I've adopted many tactics. When you're younger, at least for me, and I think more generally as well, people tend to gravitate more towards the grassroots, street-based activism. You march, you have rallies, you have protests, you have petitions. And then as you get older, other opportunities become available, whether it's meeting with politicians one-on-one because you've gotten to know them, because you're the same age as them, because maybe you went to school with them. And then other opportunities open up, like being able to write a book. So in my mid 40s, I thought, I've done about 2 decades of research and and experimentation and advocacy around democratic reform. Why not try and put that together into a book format? Although I'll tell you, what I'm really excited about is that the book is being turned into a television series, which is so much better than a book. No offense to all the authors out there, but way more people are going to be exposed to my research through the television series than through the book.
Let's talk about that television
Sure,
series
yeah.
being it's running on TVO if I remember correctly next year. Do you have anything else you want to share at this
Oh
point?
my God, I'm so excited. Josh, I'm gonna have my own TV show. It's the coolest thing. And I never imagined, like, usually the kinds of books that are turned into, TV shows are like usually have to be about vampires or young people killing each other or whatever. Wizards are popular. I never imagined that a book about democratic reform would be optioned and turned into a television series. So I'm so excited. I'm working with an amazing team of producers, directors, and researchers and writers. It's going to come out in January of 2024. So there's a bit of a wait, but these folks are going to turn the ideas into my book to something really visually exciting with animations and interviews, and I can't wait to see it.
Well, we'll be on the lookout for that in January of 2024. You've got many ideas for reforming democracy in this book, and kind of each chapter gives an idea. What are your three favorite or most important ideas for reforming democracy?
That's a really tough one. I don't think there's any three that on their own would make enough of an impact of what we need. So if you had a car, I don't know why I always use car analogies, being a like big advocator for cycling and and walking, but car analogies just work. If you had a car and it had a broken transmission and a broken engine and four flat tires and no gas and a broken alternator, and a mechanic said, well, I can fix any three for you, which one? You'd be like, well, that doesn't really that won't really help me. It's the same thing. Like when you get a proper diagnosis and you're aware that you have like polytrauma, like major issues happening, we really have to deal with them all. That said, I'll tell you which ones I think are most interesting and most fun. And some of them also are really counterintuitive. There's a few remedies in the book that are almost the exact opposite of what you would think the remedies might be for a certain dilemma. So the funnest one is randomizing the seating in the House of Commons. It's such a fun idea. I didn't make it up. It's actually being done in other parliaments. And the idea is, so Josh, if you got all the conservatives on one side of a room, all the liberals on the other side of the room, and then some new Democrats in a corner, and one or two Greens in another corner, the people who are sitting with their clan, with their squadron, are going to act in a kind of mob mentality mannerism. So it'll be more likely that they're going to cheer for each other, boo the other team, and kind of act as if, um, like it's a sport, like they're just cheerleaders. And often they do that in ways that which are really rude and really infantile and sometimes mean and misogynist. And it's really kind of gross and really sad that we have to watch these grown adults treat each other that way in our sacred House of Commons. So this proposal is that what if they were all sitting randomly? So instead of all the reds in one cluster, all the blues in one cluster, I'd be sitting next to you. You're with the purple party, I'm with the yellow party, and I'm like, "Oh, hey Josh, how was your weekend?" And we just get to know each other as human beings. And it'd be so much harder for me to stand up and say, I hate the purple people, because like, dude, you're right beside me and you just showed me a picture like of your kid playing t-ball on Saturday. So I love that idea. It's really fun, and it's the kind of idea where like, why wouldn't we try it? Why wouldn't we take one day a month, call it random Tuesdays? That would be 4 days a month. I know what it's called. What if once a year, all right, we'll call it, what should we call it? Come up with a name. If you were going to have one day of the year where Parliament sits randomly, what should we call it? It should be called Mixed Up Monday. So on one Monday of the year, there, I came up with the brand. Branding's really fun and important. Why wouldn't we mix up the seating once and just see what happens? See if it's an improvement. And this is so important, Josh. You know why we're not doing it? Because we're like we're religiously attached to tradition, which again flies in the face of the way we treat everything else in our lives. So if I was your doctor, Josh, and I was like, Josh, you should really get some more exercise, and you're like, well, I don't know, I kind of have a tradition of not doing exercise, that would be weird. But that's what we do. That's what we do in politics. We're like, if someone gives us a better idea of how to improve it, we're like, yeah, but we've been doing it this way for a few hundred years, so why don't we just keep doing it? Okay, I'll give you two more though. These are fun. We hear a lot about lobbyists, right? Lobbyists have a lot of influence, and they represent private interest, the wealthiest people who can afford lobbyists. And so what you end up with is this political landscape where the people who want to make the most money end up getting the loudest voice because they hire people to help them do that. There have been attempts to ban lobbying, um, to mandate disclosure of lobbying, to prevent senior policymakers from becoming lobbyists. That's called the revolving door scenario, where people who have a lot of insider information of how the system works become lobbyists, and then they kind of trade back and forth. But the best solution I've heard is that we could cure the illness of lobbying by just having more lobbyists. And the idea is to create a office of public lobbyists. So I'll just give you an example. Let's say someone wants to turn this beautiful lake and wetland and forest, which I live right next to, into a parking lot. So the developer will hire a lobbyist who will go to city council and the province and try and get the permits to build a parking lot over the wetland. We can't stop that from happening, Josh. But what we can do is make sure that my neighborhood association, which has no resources, no funding, that we have access to an office of public lobbyists where they give us all the same support that the developer is getting. So we level the playing field, not by reducing the power of corporate lobbyists, but by bringing us up to the same level by having lobbyists for Dave and for Josh for whatever we want to advocate for. So that was a cool one. Another really, really counterintuitive one was around financial contributions to election campaigns. Again, we've tried to reduce the amount of money that donors can give. Again, we've tried to have disclosure rules. So if Josh gives $1,000 to my election campaign, everyone knows that he gave the money. I heard the best idea, which I put in the book, and I admit in the book, in writing, I say this might be crazy. I can't tell if this is like stupid or genius. But the idea, Josh, is to make all donations completely secret and anonymous. Now, this is counterintuitive because the general rule in campaign finance reform is all about disclosure and all about information and transparency. We don't want Josh getting secret money. But what if all donations were secret? And the reason this could work is, why would I give $1,000 to your campaign, Josh? Is it just because I like you? Maybe. Or is it because I hope that if you win, I'll have more leverage because you'll remember that I gave you $1,000, right? You kind of owe me a favor, either explicitly, or you'll just be like, oh yeah, that guy, I think he was at my fundraiser. I should probably, he wants to set up a meeting. I should probably say yes. He's part of my team. But Josh, what if you didn't know who gave you that $1,000? What if you didn't know who gave you any money? What if there were checks for 100, checks for 1,000, checks for 50, and there was no names attached to any of it? That could actually solve a lot of the issues we have around campaign finance. So anyways, in the book, I put forward ideas that some of them are very straightforward. It's like, we should totally do this. Some are like, we should at least try this. And some are like, I'm not sure, this might be crazy, but we should at least be talking about it.
Awesome. What would you think, from your book or not from your book? What is a couple of your ideas for improving our democracy that specifically affect Canada's youth?
Oh, wow. There's a few. There's a whole bunch in multiple chapters. Because, I mean, I know it's so cliche, but really, like, it's all about the youth. I'm half dead. I'm 47, so I'm like literally statistically half dead. And the youth have like this whole life ahead of them. So like the whole future of our planet is going to be in their hands. And I just think that's really important. Also, I could tell you that adults, as we get older, they kind of get a little grumpier and jaded. And I think the optimism of youth isn't naive, it's not idealistic, it actually has real value. I think it's a really important um, state to be in, to be optimistic. And I think youth are better at it. Those are two reasons right there why I care about youth being engaged. I have a chapter on my last chapter of my book is about democratizing areas of our day-to-day lives, and that breaks down into democratizing our neighborhoods, democratizing our workplaces, and democratizing our schools. And I actually went to schools where the kids run the schools, like not as some token student council that just organizes a dance once a year, but an actual leadership of the kids where they set the curriculum, they can fire teachers, they can set the budget, they can teach each other, they don't even need teachers. Anyways, I visited these schools, it's in the book. It blew my mind. It was my favorite set of interviews was talking to teenagers who are going to a high school that they actually run. They were smarter. Their emotional intelligence was like through the roof. There was no bullying because they themselves weren't being exposed into the hierarchy of the principal, teachers, students. And of course, the students are going to replicate hierarchy if they can see that all the teachers have a hierarchy. It was beautiful. But another part in the book is about how we could do such a better job of teaching civics and teaching youth how democracy works. Because I think right now we do a really, really crappy job with like a half credit in grade 10 taught by teachers who don't even want to be teaching it and don't know the first thing about civics because they were taught by teachers who didn't know anything about civics 30 years before that. But the really exciting thing in my book about youth is lowering the voting age all across Canada to 16 for provincial, federal, and municipal elections. I'm committed to it. I put forward a whole series of arguments in the book about why that's important. And then since my book came out, I have been hired by Senator Mary Lou McPhedran to run a national campaign, which is at vote16.ca, to implement this idea. Because writing the book was fun, but Josh, my life right now is super fun because I get to take all the ideas in my book and try and actually implement them. And lowering the voting age is right at the top of my list.
Funny you mentioned that, Dave. I would invite our listeners to take a listen to the first ever episode of this podcast where I spoke with Taylor Bachrach, who put forward a similar motion bill in the House of Commons, and that actually is coming up for debate and a final vote in a couple of weeks, actually. So that'll be an interesting thing to follow. So, Dave, there are a lot of issues that are on the minds of Canadians and young people across the country: inflation, housing. There's a lot of talk about a lot of major issues. Um, why should Canadians put forward, think about, and care about the issue of or topic of reforming our democracy?
Well, I used the analogy before about an operating system, right? So if your operating system isn't working on your computer, then your applications aren't going to work. Nothing's going to work. Your camera's not going to work. The microphone's not going to work. You need to have a functioning operating system. The operating system we're using now, and when I say operating system, I mean everything from the way we do manage campaign finance, to the way we manage lobbying, to the way we arrange the seating in the parliament, to the voting systems we use, to the way we teach civics in high schools. All of that combined is the operating system of our democracy. And what it's producing right now is a really polarized, almost militaristic battle of two sides fighting against each other instead of creating an environment where people are listening to each other, compromising, being humble enough to admit that they don't have all the answers. And I don't think it's a radical idea to suggest that anytime you're trying to do problem solving, you're better off having a group of people who are actually talking to each other, not just two sides who are fighting with each other. I mean, people go to marriage counselors and like, couples counseling because they're fighting and they're like, we'll be better off if we don't fight, right? If we're talking to each other. And politically, we do the exact opposite. Our system is literally designed on the premise that the best outcome will come by having a government and an opposition. And the role of the opposition, as the name suggests, is to oppose, not to listen, not to suggest creative, constructive amendments, but just to oppose. So if you were the government, Josh, and I'm the opposition, whatever you put forward, I'm against it. I put something forward, you're against it. And this is why question period looks like a bunch of very young, angry children who haven't eaten breakfast and weren't raised very well. Um, so how can we create good policies about immigration, about healthcare, about harm reduction, about affordable housing, about sustainable transportation? You name it. How could we ever reach the best policy outcome when the political arena is designed as a childish battlefield? So, my argument is whatever you care about, whatever policy area is closest to your heart, you need to prioritize democratic reform because we're not going to get where we need to get any other way.
So, Dave, you're an expert in advocacy and promoting a cause and talking about the solutions that you want to be pushed forward. If one of our listeners or watchers on YouTube has something that they feel isn't right, needs to be changed, and they have a solution for that, how can they get those ideas across to eventually getting a solution to that problem?
Yeah, wow, that's what it's all about. That's the question of the day. So the first so I have two main pieces of advice to start off with. And they are: number one, change is possible, and like it really happens, and it happens because people like you and your listeners fight for it. But the flip side of that is that it never happens quickly. So you better go into this with a patient frame of mind, because if you think you can win a political campaign for a new idea in a year or even 2 years, that's just not the way it works. It's more like planting a tree. The tree will grow, but it's it's not a fast process. In terms of tips, number one, do not do it alone. It's not effective, and it's less fun. It's lonely, and you're likely to burn out, and you're likely to fail. So the first thing you want to do, let's say your idea is that here, there's a pipe cutter on my table. So I'll just hypothetically say your idea is that every child in Canada should have one of these, funded by the federal government. I don't know why they would need one, but we're just using a hypothetical example. So the first thing you want to do is you got to find other people who believe in the same thing and start a little club. You can give it a name. We're going to call it the Red Pipe Cutter Association of Canada, RPCOC. Um, and then once you have the name, then you can do some fun branding stuff. You put up a website, you get an Instagram account, a TikTok account, whatever. But then you got to figure out, okay, who am I targeting? Who would make this decision? Is it city council? No. I mean, if I wanted everyone in Cambridge to have one, that would be city council. If I wanted every kid in Ontario to have a red pipe cutter, I would be advocating at Queen's Park, our provincial legislature. But if I want every kid in Canada to have a red pipe cutter, I need a national policy, or theoretically, I could convince every provincial and territorial legislature to do it. Or I suppose I could convince every town and city council in Canada to do it. But there's 3,573 municipalities in Canada. So I'm probably going to go for the top. So then you want to do your research. Has anyone else already done this? I don't need to reinvent the wheel. Is there already a campaign for red pipe bender funding in Idaho? Because if there is, I got to talk to those people and figure out how they did it. So you want to do a lot of research. You want to have facts you want to do your research so you can find out what's been done from an advocacy point of view, but you also want to be able to say that red pipe benders have been proven to increase the happiness of children by 37.2% in 13 countries. That's a fact. So you want to be able to have sound bites like that to persuade politicians, journalists, donors, volunteers, and other colleagues who are going to join your campaign. Then you want to develop a strategy. You need one politician on the inside who's going to put forward a motion at town council or put forward a private member's bill if it's in a legislature. Ideally, you want to have a journalist who's on board, who's going to write an article about it. Maybe some young teenager who does podcasts on YouTube. Maybe he'll invite you onto his YouTube channel. It's really like, I don't want to say chess game because every piece in a chess game has like clear rules. It's more like, it's like you're building this three-dimensional, colorful, incredible puzzle. Like, it's really fun. And there's so many moving pieces because you need the media on board. You need the politicians on board. You want to get some academic support. You want to get some neighborhood support. It's crazy fun. And you should just do it and expect to lose your first vote and your second vote and maybe the next 10 votes. But if you persist and if you're organized and if you collaborate with other allies and stakeholders and you have a good idea, you'll probably be able to win.
All right. Awesome. Dave Meslin, thank you so much for joining me today. And that's it for this episode of Political Debrief. Thank you so much for listening. As always, you can connect with the show on Twitter at Josh Oliverio, on Instagram at Political Debrief Show, and you can check out the audio version and you can listen on the go by checking out Political Debrief on your favorite podcast platform. All those links are down below. Subscribe down below and hit the thumbs up. It really helps me get my episodes out to more people. And stay tuned. Next episode comes out a couple Fridays from now. Thanks so much, and I'll see you on the next episode.